Plankton's family were introduced in the iconic classic episode, Plankton's Army. In subsequent appearances, the Planktons found themselves getting bogged down by some of the most immediate and extreme flanderization that I have ever seen in a cartoon. Let's take a look at Plankton's family, their roles in the 4 episodes they appear in, and discuss what it means to write a good hillbilly. Chapter 1. Plankton's Army. The very first appearance of Plankton's family was in the episode Plankton's Army. The story of this episode revolves around Plankton attempting to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula by enlisting the help of his family. The introduction to the Plankton family members is juxtaposed by Plankton's thoughts on what they should be. Plankton expects his family members to be as smart and evil as he is, but he soon finds out that they're these hillbilly types. While one would expect the episode to be one where Plankton struggles and feuds with his family members due to how different they are, the episode doesn't really do much of that at all. Sure, there's an element of Plankton having a bit of culture shock towards the family members and him struggling to get them to pay attention to his big speech because of the whole Sheldon scene. But beyond that, Plankton actually does a good job embracing and working together with his family, which I think gives an even stronger message about how you can still work together with others towards a common goal, even if they're different from you. Of course, since it's Plankton, he has to somehow fail to obtain the secret formula due to his own flaws. And in this episode, that flaw is arrogance. Throughout the episode, Plankton makes rash decisions that blow up in his face, which we can see from the first formula stealing attempt of the episode.
Now hand over the secret Krabby Patty formula! Or what? I don't know. I never thought I'd get this far.
The assumption that all the other Planktons would be exactly like him is pretty arrogant also, and let's not forget that he even tried to take sole credit for stealing the formula. But the big moment of Plankton's character failure comes from the I exchange, when Krabs implores Plankton not to read the formula.
There's some things in this world that weren't meant for mortal eyes!
I don't care.
Not only is this a brilliant literary exchange, what with its different uses of the word I with different meanings, but it's also the moment where Plankton's main want is challenged. Is he meant for the formula? Is it something he should have? We don't really know, but what we do know is that he doesn't care if he should or should not have it. And because he doesn't care, he gets punished with the knowledge that Krabby Patties are made with ground-up plankton. A twist that hits harder considering this episode was all about different planktons. Of course, Krabby Patties aren't actually made with ground-up plankton, and the whole thing was a ploy from Mr. Krabs, but the narrative punishment still stands. And then the final joke of the episode shows that Krabs suffers from the same arrogance when Squidward correctly guesses the location of the real secret formula, despite Krabs being so confident he hit it well. So the arrogance on Plankton's part and his obsession with the formula, I think, plays really well into this episode, specifically because of the contrast between evil genius Plankton and his hillbilly family. While the other Plankton family members represent a more simple, less dignified sort of group, they are also people who are a little more content with less. They don't have these obsessive burger-stealing habits like their more educated cousin. I think this is best illustrated in the scene where Plankton asks his relatives what they want in exchange for helping him get the secret formula. And they are all content with pretty simple prizes like a new boot and root beer. While on the surface, it may seem that the juxtaposition between Plankton and his family are that one of them is a smart inventor guy and the others are silly hillbillies, the reason this episode actually resonates is not because of those base level differences, but because these two entities represent opposing perspectives. So since the writers were so good at using Plankton's family to help communicate the story and tell us something interesting about the characters all the way back in season 3, I'm sure when Plankton's family returned later on, they were approached with the same narrative weight, right? Chapter 2. Something Narwhal This Way Comes. Something Narwhal This Way Comes, that's a mouthful of a title, is the next episode that Plankton's family appeared in. But before we talk about them, we're going to have to address another major player in this particular story, Narlene. And I guess Nobby too, but he doesn't really talk, so I don't really count him. I still haven't yet gotten around to Camp Coral, so I'm not really sure what these characters are like in that show, but considering what I've seen of them here, I am not impressed. So let's talk a little bit about the hillbilly stereotype. So a hillbilly in popular culture is a more rural sort of person, often associated with being disorganized, unintelligent, and plays lots of banjo. It's one of the few types of people that is accepted enough as a stereotype that you can see it sometimes in kids shows. Now look, I'm not exactly looking to get up on some soapbox and talk about how Narlene Narwhal and Plankton's family are some kind of offensive stereotype, but I will point out that someone just being a hillbilly hillbilly isn't exactly a great joke on its own. Like, remember what I said about Plankton's army? In that episode, the Plankton family members were unambiguously hillbilly stereotypes, but every hillbilly-related joke was made to juxtapose the family to Plankton, and thus further enhance the story. Plankton seeing their hillbillies when he expected them to be scientists is a great example. The butt of the joke is not hillbillies, the butt of the joke is Plankton, because he arrogantly assumed every other plankton in the sea is like him. Or the joke with all the different names. While the joke does go through a bunch of redneck-sounding names, the joke itself is more about how many different relatives Plankton has and just how many of the plankton species there are in the sea. And of course, their main motivation being root beer, as I said earlier, works well because it's a simple desire in contrast with Plankton's more complicated plans of stealing burger recipes and world domination. Now, this is not to say that any of these jokes don't poke fun at the hillbilly stereotype. They all do. But these jokes also tell the story. They also expand our understanding of the character, and most importantly, they further humanize the hillbillies even though they're poking fun at them. To compare this to Something Narwhal This Way Comes, the Narwhal hillbillies are completely disconnected from any sort of humanity, and are reduced to either cheap jokes or them just being all around oblivious to how they are taking over SpongeBob's house and the rest of Bikini Bottom. The story of the episode is incredibly weak. It just has Narlene kind of offhandedly point out that SpongeBob said she could stay with him anytime, and then she just kind of takes over his house. Now, on paper, this is a character flaw on SpongeBob's part. He did make a promise that someone could stay with him, and he didn't put his foot down when it started to go too far. But the episode doesn't really engage with that much at all. SpongeBob doesn't even really seem all that annoyed with them for most of the episode, which makes there be just about no tension in what should be a tense situation. An episode that did this same plot so much better was Can You Spare a Dime? Because it actually took us on the journey of setting up SpongeBob's relationship to Squidward. It set up why SpongeBob feels bad for Squidward, it shows us how uncomfortable Squidward overstaying his welcome is, and it has a really satisfying conclusion where SpongeBob stands up for himself. That's how you do a guest overstays their welcome storyline. You tie it to a character arc. You tie it to an actual story. The reason that Can You Spare a Dime works as a narrative while Something Narwhal This Way Comes falls flat is because Can You Spare a Dime leans on its story and character arcs, while Something Narwhal This Way Comes leans on cheap hillbilly jokes. So why am I talking about Narlene? I thought this was supposed to be a video about Plankton's family, right? So Plankton's family are how the conflict gets solved in this episode, because it's established that the Planktons and the Narwhals have some kind of hillbilly feud with one another. So Plankton calls his family and they come in and chase the Narwhals out. It's one of those cartoon endings where it's like, well, guess we're out of time. Let's find a way to end the story. After no character flaws have been challenged and no lessons have been taught. Plankton isn't even a major character in this episode. He only shows up when they need to call his family, so any hope of Plankton having any sort of character moments or juxtaposition with his family are just completely out the window. It also doesn't make sense that the Planktons chasing the Narwhals out causes them to somehow redo all of the locations back to their status quo. And I know you're thinking, oh, but it's cartoon logic. No. That is not how cartoon logic works. Cartoon logic only works if the thing that breaks the laws of reality is used to meaningfully enhance the story. Like, for example, in Wet Painters, when Patrick pulls a giant axe out of thin air to hit the paint can, it's using cartoon logic to communicate that Patrick is irresponsible. We as the audience don't care that the axe being there makes no sense, because what is being communicated enhances the story. And also, Patrick pulling out the axe from nowhere represents an action that he could have reasonably done within real-world logic, like, say, pry open the paint can forcibly. But the axe is funnier than him just prying it open, so the axe was the better choice to communicate the message. Does the Narwhals magically putting everything back while running away from the Plankton fit any of that criteria? Of course not. It's obviously just a lazy way for the writers to put everything back to normal. But I think the thing that is the weakest element of the whole Plankton-Narwhal feud is the fact that they're both the exact same kind of hillbilly. Like, these two groups are supposed to be feuding, but they're just the same sort of people. It's just one are Plankton and one are Narwhals. Like, am I missing something? Is someone familiar with hillbillyology gonna be like, actually the Planktons are Idahoan hillbillies while the Narwhals are more like Tennessee? Or is it just that the writers were a little too gung-ho with their hillbilly references? Chapter 3. Blood is Thicker Than Grease. Blood is Thicker Than Grease is an episode that revolves around Plankton's parents winning the lottery and starting a potato restaurant next door to the Chum Bucket. I question why they even had the plot point of Plankton's parents winning the lottery in the episode, as that fact doesn't really connect too much to the story at all. Like, yeah, I get that that's how they bought the restaurant, but when in a story a character wins the lottery, that usually makes them like comically rich, you know? I think I still would have been able to believe that Plankton's parents made a restaurant without the lottery money. And nothing in the episode that has anything to do with the lottery money has any real bearing on the story, other than a few gags with a chrome-plated trailer. I guess there was also a moment where the parent says something along the lines of that since now they're rich, they can live by their city-dwelling son, which does kind of draw a difference between Plankton and his parents, but since the episode doesn't really explore this any deeper than the one superficial line, I can't really give the episode much credit for it. So much of the conflict of the episode revolves around the Spud Bucket taking business away from the Krusty Krab, which would make the secret formula useless since no one wants Krabby Patties anymore. So because of this, Plankton tries to sabotage the Spud Bucket in order to make Krabby Patties more popular again. So my first issue with this episode is the potatoes. First off, I don't get why all of a sudden the hillbilly Planktons are like king of potatoes or whatever. Like, I kind of get it, sure, they're all rural, so they grow potatoes, but I don't really get why they had to tie potatoes so much with the hillbillies. Like, it just feels like their whole personality is potatoes now, and it just kind of reveals how little these characters stand on their own otherwise. Also, I just don't really buy the reason that a potato-based restaurant would suddenly run the Krusty Krab out of business. It's just so unearned that all of a sudden their potatoes are so good that no one would want to eat a Krabby Patty again. They're just regular potatoes. What is it about them that makes them so good? To compare this episode to another episode where Krabs competes with a new product, Patty Hype, that episode works because the reason that the Pretty Patties are such stiff competition compared to Krabby Patties are because of their gimmick, which says something about the character of Mr. Krabs because he doubted them earlier in the episode. Blood is Thicker Than Grease doesn't do any of that, and that is why I can easily tell that all of the townspeople suddenly loving potatoes and hating Krabby Patties is just something cheaply manufactured by the narrative because the episode needs conflict. In fact, the episode seems to not want to engage with what the episode is clearly about: the difficulty in navigating a relationship with parents who are drastically different from you. The narrative seems to flirt with the idea of Plankton having some kind of rift with his family due to their differences, but it never really pulls the trigger on any of it. The parents seem to be completely oblivious of Plankton's judgmental attitude and his attempts to destroy the restaurant. They're just these wooden stereotypes the whole episode, and there's no moment where their differences actually come up in a scene in a meaningful way. The fact that Plankton wants to get rid of them just because it fits his secret formula plans actively undermines the more emotional reasons why Plankton would really want to destroy the restaurant, which is because of the personal conflict he has with his parents. Plankton's army didn't do that either, but the reason that Plankton's army still worked as an episode is because Plankton had distinct character flaws that he refused to overcome throughout the story, which led to his downfall. Because this episode lacks anything meaningful to challenge Plankton other than the surface level challenge of dealing with an opposing restaurant, its story doesn't resonate one bit. In the end, Plankton gives up and decides to start working at the Spud Bucket, and then because he puts chum in the potatoes, it ends up ruining the restaurant. It's an okay twist, I get it. Plankton spent the whole episode trying to destroy the place, and now that he actually wants to work there, he ends up ruining it. But this, once again, doesn't really say anything about the character, and it's obvious to me that the writers just saw this as a quick, mildly funny way to revert the characters back to their established status quo. Chapter 4: Plankton's Family in the Plankton Movie. Plankton's family did also appear in the Plankton Movie, in a flashback to Plankton's childhood. I think that they were used well in the movie because a lot of Plankton's arc in that movie revolves around him deconstructing his past and his relationship with Karen. And by showing how alone Plankton felt with his hillbilly family, despite how many of them there are, it makes us really feel for him and understand why he built Karen. They also tie in the whole potato thing again, but I think it's pretty meaningful to the story, as it's revealed that Karen herself is powered by a potato, kind of like an advanced potato clock of sorts. The potato, which represents the mundane and simple hobbies of the Plankton family, is now the mechanism of Plankton's greatest scientific achievement. It's a pretty nice piece of backstory for the characters. Chapter 5: In the Mood to Feud. In the Mood to Feud is one of those cartoon episodes that tries to have a good message, but executes it in just about the most awful way possible. So this is another Narlene episode. Yay! And it revolves around SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy going to visit the Narwhals and getting caught up in their feud with the Planktons. So, we all know what the message is supposed to be here, right? They fight over the place, but they should share it because they're really not that different on the inside. But something that really irks me about this episode is Narlene's insistence that the feud is fun. Like, I don't get the message here. Is it a real feud or not? Is it all performative? Why should I care if you're just doing it for fun? And if it's not for fun, why don't you take it seriously? Another thing that's odd about this episode is that the Planktons still have their potatoes as a defining attribute, and the narwhals are shown to have these bee-colored jellyfish that make honey, and it seems like the obvious ending here is that they're gonna make like honeyed potatoes or something and find out that they're better together. They do no such thing. Like, that just doesn't happen. You really think that's going to happen. Like, you're like, oh, that's so going to be the ending, right? They don't even address the possibility of that happening. And also, there's some weird moment where they're like, yeah, we let them sting us. Seriously, there's a whole scene in this episode that's all about how they let the jellyfish sting them, and you get these gross out moments with bumps. I don't understand why this had to be a scene. Is this funny to people? Do people laugh at this? And while we're on the subject of these jellyfish, I don't like them from a world building perspective either. It's just a way of having bees exist in the ocean, which is another instance of modern SpongeBob disregarding its underwater setting. I mean, this whole forest location does that too, and don't even get me started on this donkey with fins when a seahorse design already exists within SpongeBob. Anyway, I talked about why this sort of stuff is a problem in my Gorilla Suit Day video, link in the description. But with the jellyfish specifically, I really don't like their existence because jellyfish already represent bees, and the jellyfish jelly already represents honey. So why would they need to go out of their way to establish a new kind of jellyfish that is a little more bee-like when you already have the jellyfish that represent bees? It's just pointless. So the episode just devolves into a bunch of moderately entertaining action sequences between the Planktons and the narwhals fighting each other until the end where they're like, maybe we're not so different. And then Narlene has another quip about how feuding is fun. And can I say, we all understand this episode is supposed to be about racism, right? Like, the narwhals have a feud with the Planktons based on their immutable characteristics. That's the narrative they set up. And then they just refuse to take it seriously. Like, I guess maybe Narlene thinking it's fun is a reference to how people who are racist often enjoy being racist. Like, it's more about the fun than the actual bigotry. But that doesn't read with 2 lines where she says that feuds are fun. It just reads like the whole episode doesn't want to take its subject matter seriously, despite it choosing to cover serious subject matter. But the biggest problem with this episode is that Sheldon J. Plankton, the Plankton we know, is completely absent. Yes, I can excuse racism, but I draw the line at Plankton not being in the episode.
You can excuse racism.
Okay, maybe not tackling the subject matter properly is worse, but still, I really miss Plankton. Without Plankton being in the episode, we have absolutely zero juxtaposition for these hillbilly characters. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy are basically props with eyes and don't offer any of their own perspective, so the whole episode just defaults to a bunch of shallow hillbilly stereotypes. It doesn't tell us anything about any character, it's just, in its purest form, a big waste of time with a sprinkling of unfunny hillbilly jokes. Plankton's family have not appeared much in the SpongeBob series. Their existence makes Plankton a bit more interesting of a character and adds a little more depth to his overcompensation with his big vocabulary and reminding people he went to college. Even though Plankton's family is such a rich opportunity to have us learn more about the character, beyond their introductory episode in Season 3, the Plankton family members have never been used to actually expand Plankton's character again, except in the Plankton movie. I hope that a future episode can bring back the characters and tone down the stereotyping in favor of actual rich characterization. And while that may be possible, not all of modern SpongeBob is as bad as the examples in this video. Modern SpongeBob is particularly bad when it comes to stereotypical characters, as the writers often use things like that to ignore having to tell a real story. So I think it's best if Plankton's family just doesn't reappear in the series, and we can just appreciate how well they were used in Plankton's army. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, please consider subscribing to my Patreon or becoming a channel member. If you want to see more from me, I've got more scripted content on the right, or if you're looking for a little unscripted content, click on the left. See you next time.